Hi, my name is Scott. It's good to have you back. I'm here to record my workflow for adding music to a Roon library. I found that there are so many videos on YouTube that talk about having a hard drive that's already completely loaded up with music and you're setting up Roon for the first time. What I haven't seen is somebody just showing the mechanics of you're ripping a new CD and then you add that to your current Roon library and you watch the counter go up as it goes from, X number of albums to X plus one, X plus three. And so I'm just going to kind of do a casual walkthrough about how I add music to my Rune library. And here in this window, we can see that I have in between the CDs that I have ripped, and these represent box sets in addition to standalone single albums. And then my title library, which is dozens or so, however many albums that is. I have more than 3,870 albums in total, and many of those are RIP CDs. So I have three discs plugged into my laptop computer right now, and I rip everything as ALAC quality using Apple Music, once upon a time called iTunes. And I like to do a thing where for any album title, I like to augment the information a little bit where I like to say it's the album title, what format is it, LP, OST, EP, comp, something like that, and then the year of it. It's just sort of a, file naming convention that I do for myself. And then going in here, we can check that. Sometimes the date values are automatically plugged into this for 2024. And I'll also do artist kind of cleanup and what have you, in case it's like, you have individual tracks that are broken out by artist name. I might just sort of unify it so that the way that the folders get created over in the Apple interface via iTunes, Apple Music, is just that much easier to handle. And over here, 1884, because for as much as I change my album titles and whatnot, right, like this, I do set up I have my settings in Rune to default to its own sorting, its own genre identification, all those sorts of things. Way back in the day when I was doing all of my digital music playback via Apple Music's player through like an Apple TV, for example, or using something like the Cambridge Audio kind of Magic Stream app, I was much more particular about editing and modifying genres and stuff like that. Nowadays, I just don't worry about it. I just want to make sure that when I rip the music, it ends up in a predictable folder structure so then when I add it to my Rune external hard drive that's sourced for the folder agnostic folder path, kind of like music directory for Rune, it's just that much easier to grab it from the computer to put into the external hard drive because I'm ripping all of this music on a laptop computer. And if we were to jump over to the music folder, we can see that under, just music used to be called iTunes. We now have for these three, musicians and bands, we have the CDs are getting ripped in real time together. I have found with my own computer setup and USB ports, I can rip three CDs simultaneously and I won't have any crashes or problems. If I try to go beyond three, there is the occasional hiccup or some sort of power stutter, something like that. And considering that I don't buy too much music, I am known to borrow CDs from the public library and then, I plug them into my computer and then I return them. So I only need to borrow them once. And then I have them forever in my Rune library as a backup from copies that are available out there. Or if you're able to just make copies of music that's, borrowed from friends and family or the things that you legitimately purchase. So we're going to let this just all rip and burn. We can see the status happening for these albums. And for external CD-ROM drives or CD-RW, DVD-R drives, I just use some LG things that you can still get from Amazon, for example. They use an older sort of USB connection, so you might have to get an adapter or something like that if you're in sort of a USB-C world. However, they do perform really, really well. And considering that laptops and most desktop machines do not have optical drives, grab one while you can because I have one that has been working just fine for more than 15 years. And then I have two versions of the LG drive that are a more modern version of that. And, they're just used for ripping albums like this. And they have been used for more than just the 3,000 plus CDs that have been ripped for this current library representation here, because a few years ago, I decided to do a complete reset for my digital library because I had things that were ripped as MP3, as AAC, 320 kilobytes per second. Now everything is ripped as Apple lossless. So I don't go AIFF, I don't do WAV files. I believe that lossless is more than enough, and the savings, for storage space is like just that happy sort of medium, that sort of thing. So it looks like the Talk Talk album is going to take a little more time than the other ones. I hope it's not scratched up or any problems like that. We'll just let that continue to work through. Here I can show that over in my laptop hard drive where we have this album by Dive and this record by Fred Hirsch, let's head over to through my cloud network. I have a Mac Mini that I use as my Roon server. And here on the Mac Mini, I have an external hard drive just called Roon-EHD. And I have my primary folder structure for all the albums. And this follows pretty much the convention that will happen with Apple Music, where if it's an artist name, not a compilation, you'll just get like the artist name alphabetically by their forename. And then for bands that are like the Platters, the Jets, the Hives, the Beatles, you'll find them over here under the. And what is my practice and habit is basically go to the artist here. And then I just go to check to see, do I already have albums by this band? And I think for Dive, this will be my first one. So I can just grab this, drag it over the Library Prime. It's going to copy it in. And if we switch our filters on albums to date added, we now see that new record has been added right here. It's now populated the album artwork and everything like that. It's retained my file name convention for the album title. But if we were to go into it, it's going to have all the genres and recommendations and things that are just powered through Roon. And this is just a very quick example to show one album. Here we'll add Fred Durst. I believe I might have some stuff by this jazz musician and of Fred Hirsch. No disrespect to Fred Hirsch. So, with Esperanza Spalding. Nice. Okay, we'll let this be a new standalone thing. And there are times where when I drag and drop stuff into the Prime library like this, it might prompt to say, do you want to merge the albums that are being combined together? I'm always concerned that I might accidentally overwrite and then therefore accidentally delete files that I already have. But I find that this is the best method for me, is just to keep a singular prime directory of my Roon library. And then every 3 weeks or so, at least once a month, I back up this entire directory onto another external hard drive, and then also back that up to another external hard drive. So I'm pretty diligent about keeping copies of all of my music. At the moment, it's shy of 2 terabytes of files, despite having, tens of thousands of songs, over 3,800 plus around, CDs. Not that all of that is local here. There is still some of the things that are my title library that I've added in here. And let's go back over to Apple Music. All right, this one's just going kind of slowly. I can't explain why. It's in one of the more modern LG drives. Perhaps there's some disk writing correction stuff happening. And that's always part of the risk with music that you either get from public sources or from from friends is that are the CDs in sort of a scratched up condition. Because I've had the moment where there's a record, I rip it, and then when I play it back, I discovered that it's got unacceptable blips and blemishes. So then I'll just delete it from the Roon library and then I'll supplant that with the things that are available through Tidal. But there are still the occasions where you have albums that are only available on CD. Most recently, Joy Division, the BBC recordings that you can also get through a compilation, a 2 disc thing, kind of like a greatest hits kind of retrospective. This one here, the Best of Joy Division, this one plus the dedicated standalone BBC, this is not available on any streaming. You can only get it on CD and some places where, like say like YouTube, where it's sort of unofficial streaming in that respect. And I did not have to do it with any of the records that are in this current iTunes sort of ripping session. But something to be very mindful about is when you start putting in your albums to rip and burn, be very aware of trying to do a file name convention. So, for example, let's look at this Joy Division record here, and let's go to the folder. And in here, you can see that we are very intentional about having the parenthetical disk 1 and parenthetical disk 2 in this consistent naming format here, because what that results in your library is having a singular tile with the little kind of earmark thing and the number of multi-discs in the set. And this can save a lot of visual clutter in your Roon library experience. The biggest example that I can show here is the Duke Ellington RCA Centennial Collection that a dear friend of mine and I purchased together back in 1999. And this is 24 albums. And you can then jump through the collection like this in your Roon library, having every single disc laid out, so long as you did that discipline of the file name convention for the folder title, the album title, to adhere to this. Because if you don't do that, you're going to have 24 tiles, one per album. And if you did have some box set that did have every individual disc has unique artwork and has for you that granularity is special and unique and you want that curated and presented, by all means, you do you, have it out there. I'm of the mindset where I just want to have a clean tile thing like this, and that I don't have for those 2 disc collections, those multi-disc collections, just the things are repeating themselves. And then there's always the risk that the thumbnail, perhaps for secondary, third albums, may not populate. And for you, your OCDs and whatnot, is that going to be a problem or is it not going to be a problem? So let's go back over, and it looks like here for this Talk Talk album that is now completed. That'll be over here and available. It's My Life. So let's go check out the Roon Library Prime. And I believe I do have some Talk Talk in here already. And indeed I do. So let's just grab this record here, drop this in, and plop. There it is. The copying is now completed over my network. It's a very seamless and kind of easy method for me to add stuff to my hard drive that is part of my Roon server. But you can easily, very much so, just put this onto a hard drive, unplug it from wherever you're ripping, plug it back in and copy it over. Or if you're doing all of your ripping in the same computer, the same station, if you wanted to get to the point where what you rip automatically goes over to the directory that is read to be part of your Roon library, that's a method of going about it. Something else that I did back in the past was that I designate Roon EHD. This is the folder that Roon looks at to find new media files to add to the library. So that means we're not beholden to, I have to add music to the subfolders within this space here. I could just as easily create a new folder alongside, this kind of like top tier folder here and just date it for today's date, add more content to it, create another folder for the next time I do a ripping session, add it, and I could just have that history of all my rips together in kind of like in chronological history of when I've added them to the overall hard drive, and it'll still just represent in Rune. And that's an amazing convenience. That is fantastic. For me, though, I find that when I want to do my backups and I want to and have my stuff just like, let's go save the entire directory, those broken out folders become quite a hassle. So that little bit of extra effort up front for merging the new albums together between, say, putting Talk Talk in with Talk Talk, or adding Dive for the first time ever, or creating a new folder there for Fred Hirsch, doing that little bit of work now just saves you time later, and it makes those backups just that much easier. The one thing that can happen with ripping music in iTunes with Apple Music is that they are very, very like kind of like, they want to create something called like the compilation, like nobody's business. And in here, I have plenty of albums that are compilations that probably could just be cleaned up to be a singular like kind of musician. So this is probably an Aretha Franklin album that could just be moved over to Aretha Franklin, but perhaps because some of the subtracks in here are like Aretha Franklin featuring so and so, it's prompted it to be a compilation. Again, what are your OCDs? Like, how much do you care about this? And how much do you want to try to like be very particular about every little thing? Because since Rune is folder path agnostic, we're going to find that Aretha Franklin record is just going to show up under Aretha Franklin. It doesn't quite matter whether it's under folder path compilation or not. And with Rune, you can go directly to the folder. So this is, again, the way that there's a little bit of chaos, there's a little bit of like wonkiness to it. Rune is so forgiving and so kind of like excellent at taking your stuff and curating it over that as you rip it and you drop it into your folder directory, it's going to show up in your My Albums and it's just going to be there. And this is part of the beauty and the convenience and the big selling points about leveraging Rune for having your ripped music library presented to you like this. And I wanted to make this video and show just this small example of adding 3 albums. I have an additional 15 or more CDs I'm going to rip tonight, and how you have your library built out, you need to add a little more, and what were some of the trials and tribulations I had along the way. So for me, it's rip your music, have it in some space that's not in your exact Rune library, the place where it's looking. So that way, when you drop it in, you can be very particular and very precise about where you place it. And then that makes it where if you do backups like I do, then you have a real good sense of what's the date stamp for, or like when was the last time you updated your music, and then backing up the whole directory. Because the one thing that is risky about having a ripped music library, and if you have one that's ripped and based off of perhaps the way I do it by borrowing things from the public library, it could just be ephemeral. There is that risk, kind of that possibility that all your work, all that effort could just sort of be gone. So do your due diligence, and please, if anything, just enjoy your music, have a great time with it. And if this was in any way informative, I'm glad that you watched it. And please have a great time with your own Rune libraries and doing everything that you can to just have your music there whenever you want to. Bye bye.